In the 1500s, the Portuguese started trading in Africa with the African people. The products that were traded were gold, ivory, pepper, dye wood, and birds. Soon the Portuguese began to create a trade route, build castles and fortresses. The English joined in on the trade. As they built fortresses, they also created colonies along what is known as the Gold Coast. The people of Africa soon became a commodity. They brought Africans from conquering tribes, and they also just snatched and captured them. And they built slave pens to house humans. The people of Africa were chained and walked miles to the slave pens. The people of Africa were housed in the slave pens from 4 weeks to months after being packed on a slave ship from head to toe and toe to head, side by side. No place to use a toilet but where they slept. Because of the conditions and odors, this spread disease that led to death. Shocks often follow these ships, slave ships, because the dead were often thrown overboard. In 1619, slave ships came on the shores of the colonies. The slaves were treated like indentured servants and then set free with all the rights of a citizen of the colonies. While under colonial rule, slavery started in 1630 by the Portuguese and English to provide free labor for plantations, such as sugar plantations, tobacco plantations, cotton plantations. And Africans were also sold as servants. And you could buy an African woman as your maid, and that was offered to men. The colonies were under British rule. Slavery of the African Americans became a way of life. In the 1660s in Virginia, African Americans could be baptized and become free. In 1667, they removed that law in Virginia. By 1698, the British ruled slavery. The mid-Atlantic slave route was used by organized English slave traders and others. Generations had passed since African Americans were known to be able to work for their freedom. In 1775, a war started between the colonies and England. Africans sided with the blue coats and the red coats, hoping to gain their freedom. In 1776, America was declared a country, but the slavery of Africans became a law. Since 1698, Africans were considered slaves, and very few were set free after the War of Independence. The signers of the Declaration of Independence grew up under African slavery. It was the way they lived. The women had no voice. They were used for their body and labor. The men had the right to work. Some of them were used for their body and labor. When women gave birth, their children were put up for sale right. Virginia churches required that slaves be permitted to learn to read, to create Christians. Only 5% of African Americans. It depended upon the farm which held them as slaves. What the farms required, with plantations being so large, housing so many people. In my research, it didn't surprise me that they had to forage for their food. I know that strawberries were plentiful in Virginia. And one thing that I know they had to eat is pork greens. Pork greens are wild greens. They don't grow on a farm anywhere around here. And it's a lot of life that grows in the James River, the Chesapeake Bay, the York River, the, what is it? The James River, the Chesapeake Bay, the York River, the Pagan River. We're known for its seaweed, clams, shrimp, oysters, and of course fish, and maybe snails, because there are snails around here. Maybe snails or conch. Most of the farms did not endorse slaves learning how to read. In the 1800s, a slave named Gabriel conspired an insurrection with 12 other African American slaves. They planned in Virginia a conspiracy against Hanover County, Richmond, Caroline County, and south towards Petersburg. They were betrayed by 2 other slaves. After the uprising warning, it became more difficult for slaves to learn how to read and write. Nat Turner's Revolt in 1831 led to Virginia putting laws in place that made it illegal for African Americans to learn how to read and write. As the laws against freedom from slavery became more constraining, the people who disapproved of slavery became outspoken. One thing about slavery, there was no real rules for family life. Women were really a commodity, and they had very little rights, none whatsoever. So it wasn't unusual for it to be a family one minute and a woman being put somewhere else another, or all the men killed off or sold. In my research, when I read those ads about men and women and children running away together, I know in a place where there's no rules, people do fall in love and they do run away. For people to say there was a real family life, that was not true. Their husbands could be sold. They could be taken out of the field and put with anybody. So sometimes people don't measure the importance of a relationship or the importance of women. The family is a commandment of God. And here's when God ordained family. And Adam said, "This is now bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man. Therefore shall a man leave his father and mother, and still cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh." As human beings, when we're not allowed to have a relationship like that, it can cause a lot of discontent in life. The children were everybody's child, community's children. I might not have kids, but she's dead, he's gone, and that means we have to take up the raising of her child and his child as our children. So the family, and the fact, they were slaves. They had no rights. You know, over a period of time, being written down in the books as 3/4 human, these people had to believe this. It had to become a part of their belief system. They had to have passed it down from one child to the other. Some Christians began to let their slaves go by the order of Jesus Christ. Soon a movement started to free African Americans. John Brown was a very loved abolitionist, even though he started fighting He started a fight. He was very loved. Abolitionists adored him. Frederick Douglass was a nonviolent abolitionist. There were hot spots, places of freedom, cities where African Americans could be free. Cities began to disallow the capture of escaped slaves. The Underground Railroad arose. The African American and the abolitionists. African Americans were finally connecting outside of the farm where they were enslaved. Christians allowed other Christians to speak out against slavery. It was American activists working together to bring people to freedom. The country was not going to be divided into slave states and free states. So in 1861, Abraham Lincoln decided to fight for freedom of the African American slaves. In the beginning of the war, the African Americans were considered contraband, but after a while they became cooks and fighters. The African Americans of the South slowly became a part of the American military. By 1865, the slaves were free. They lived and moved around the country without being lynched. They enjoyed the full rights of a United States citizen. African Americans were slaves for over 235 years. That includes when the country was under British rule. After the case, the laws of Jim Crow were put into place, which started in 1896. For the next 89 years, Jim Crow ruled America. The laws of Jim Crow placed African Americans back on the farm in some areas of America as slaves. They were killed for trying to escape the plantation. They could be killed without an investigation. It sparked a riot in Illinois as they held the man in jail awaiting a trial. A crowd, a group of people, a mob of people came to the African American area and began to burn, kill, rape, and riot. They also bust into the jail. They castrated the man and lynched, hung, killed the man that was accused of the rape. And there was also a man in jail from the railroad that they also lynched that day. The riots sparked the development of the NAACP. The NAACP gathered a group together to march against the race riots in Illinois, and that was in 1909. And the race talking about this is explain to you how different farms, different tribes, different families in America have different beliefs. They had different beliefs. And this belief system comes off in the United States, and it divides our neighborhoods. I mean, some people have to be taken to court and threatened. And the reason why is because they come from different families, different farms, different tribes. They have different beliefs. We're mixing together, but both of y'all believe that black people don't need UVA and UVB protection. Everybody know we don't sunburn. But both of y'all believe because of our melon, we don't need no protection. Both of y'all believe we shouldn't drink milk because of our melon. Both of y'all believe, see? And both of us believe that children need high shoes. Both of us believe that we need African Americans need skin protection, UVA and UVB protection. Both of us. Everybody from that farm, that family, that tribe. And this divides the belief system.
Delegation. The location for the meeting with Senator Ribicoff has been changed to the Red Cross tent, which is to my left. 11 o'clock, Senator Ribicoff will meet the Connecticut delegation at the Red Cross tent.
How many deaths will it take till he knows that too many people have died? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. We'd like to sing a song. I had a hammer in the morning, had a hammer in the
I request requesting the demonstrators to meet me in front of us.
We're going to stand together. We're going to sing together. We're going to stay together. We're going to moan together. We're going to groan together. And after a while, we'll say, freedom, freedom, freedom now.
I give you Mr. Burt Lancaster.
All Americans traveling no matter where in the world today are in the position of ambassadors and are very often made bitterly aware of our country's reputation. It is not easy to be an American abroad, nor is it easy to make coherent to those who are not Americans the nature and the meaning of our struggle. And we are therefore forever indebted to those Americans represented by the March on Washington movement for giving us so stunning an example of what America aspires to become, and for helping us to redefine in the middle of this dangerous century what is meant by the American Revolution. We recognize that it is not only in America that the battle for freedom and dignity of peoples is being waged. The struggle toward freedom on the part of the previously subjugated is occurring in capitals and villages all over the world. It is on our awareness of what this struggle means and in the degree of our dedication to it that our futures and the future of the world depend.
sea. Spread the message far and near. The time is now. The place is here. The acknowledged champion of civil rights in America, Mr. Roy Wilkins, Executive Secretary, National Association for the Advancement of Culture.
I want some of you to help me win a bet. I want everybody out here in the open to keep quiet. And I want to hear a yell and a thunder from all those people who are out there under the trees. Let's hear you. Yeah. There's one of them in the tree. Let us bow our heads in prayer. God of history and of all mankind, God of Abraham and Moses, Amos and Isaiah, Jesus and Paul, God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, pour out thy benediction upon the United States of America. Pour it out upon President Kennedy.
However, we know that this is not going. We believe that it's going to have its effect on the image of our country all over the world, because it will indicate that not only are Negroes struggling to achieve a transition from second-class to first-class citizenship, but that our white brothers and sisters are marching arm in arm with the Negro citizens of the country for the purpose of achieving this objective. And consequently, this is and has been a great American experience. I think
Roman Catholic group interracial commission, which was represented here, that we, I think, proved that our judgment was right. The thing we wanted to do was to get in behind the leadership of the Negro community. Clearly, the religious leader of this occasion was Martin Luther King, and we are proud to have served behind and strengthening the witness that he's been carrying. The other thing is that we did produce a non-segregated march.
Find the answers in the light of reason. Can we be certain that the apostles of hatred will not search for the answers in the darkness of night? And I believe that the real significance of what we have started here today is that we have laid the groundwork for the building of a functioning, broad coalition of Americans from all walks of life, from all points of view, from all races and creeds and color, who can carry on not only the common struggle to achieve an effective and meaningful civil rights legislation, but who can do this practical work, the day-to-day job of fighting discrimination in education, in housing, in employment, in public accommodations. And I think this is the true significance of what we have started today.
Pleasure now to present the moral leader of our nation, one who has conducted a massive moral campaign in the southern area of the nation against the citadel of racism, Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr.
Thank you, Mr. Randolph. I would simply like to say that I think this has been one of the great days of America. And I think this march will go down as one of the greatest, if not the greatest, demonstrations for freedom and human dignity ever held in the United States.
50 years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro is still languished in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. And so we've come here today to dramatize a shameful condition. In a sense, we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. And so we've come to cash this check, a check that will give us upon demand the riches of freedom and the security of justice. We have also come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all of God's children. It would be fatal for the nation to overlook the urgency of the moment. This sweltering summit of the Negro's legitimate discontent will not pass until that is an invigorating autumn of freedom and equality. 1963 is not an end, but a beginning. Those who hope that the Negro needed to blow off steam and will now be content will have a rude awakening if the nation returns to business as usual. There will be neither rest nor tranquility in America until the Negro is granted his citizenship rights. The whirlwinds of revolt will continue to shake the foundations of our nation until the bright day of justice emerges. But that is something that I must say to my people who stand on the warm threshold which leads into the palace of justice. In the process of gaining our rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. We must fail to conduct our struggle on the high plane of dignity and discipline. We must not allow our creative protest to degenerate into physical violence. Again and again, we must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force. The marvelous new militancy which has engulfed the Negro community must not lead us to a distrust of all white people. For many of our white brothers, as evidenced by their presence here today, have come to realize that their destiny is not of ours. They have come to realize that their freedom is inextricably bound to our freedom. We cannot walk alone. As we walk, we must make the pledge that we shall always march ahead. We cannot turn back. There are those who are asking the devotees of civil rights, when will you be satisfied? We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality. We can never be satisfied as long as our body is heavy with the fatigue of travel, cannot gain lodging in the motels of the highways and the hotels of the city. We cannot be satisfied as long as a Negro in Mississippi cannot vote and a Negro in New York believes he has nothing for which to vote. No, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. I am not unmindful that some of you have come here out of great trials and tribulations. Some of you have come fresh from narrow jail cells. Some of you have come from areas where your quest for freedom left you battered by the storms of persecution and staggered by the winds of police brutality. You have been the veterans of creative suffering. Continue to work with the faith that unearned suffering is redemptive. Go back to Mississippi. Go back to Alabama. Go back to South Carolina. Go back to Georgia. Go back to Louisiana. Go back to the slums and ghettos of our northern cities, knowing that somehow this situation can and will be changed. Let us not wallow in the valley of despair. I say to you today, my friends, so even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today a dream that one day down in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, one day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted, and every hill and mountain shall be made low. The rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope. This is a faith that I go back to the South with. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. This will be the day. This will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with new meaning, "My country, tears of thee. Sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. And if America is to be a great nation, This must become true. And so let freedom ring from the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire. Let freedom ring from the mighty mountains of New York. Let freedom ring from the heightening Alleghanies of Pennsylvania. Let freedom ring from the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado. Let freedom ring from the curvaceous slopes of California. But not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring, and when this happens, when we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
Be